Australians could face 2-year jail sentences and fines of up to $25,000 under proposed laws that limit the use of some cash transactions. There are calls for the government to withdraw the proposal, which was announced in the budget, to fight the so-called black economy.
The black economy discussion is, as I've said before, simple, plain misdirection. That's not what this is about at all.
And they're using arguments that are a total con. A 2017 study of the black economy showed that Australia has the 10th smallest black economy in the world. And Japan, which is the heaviest user of cash in the world, Japanese people use the most cash, has an even smaller black economy than Australia's. This is an absolutely bogus argument. And let me put it up on the screen and you can do an overlay too. That's Australia's black economy from 1991 to 2015. It's almost halved. Without cash bans, without any of that rubbish, right? We don't have a problem. We don't have a problem in this country that you would take away people's freedom and privacy to supposedly address. It's rubbish. And by destroying that, then people are forced to look at the ulterior motive.
The Better Than Cash Alliance was initiated and funded by the left-wing Ford Foundation in 2012. Its stated purpose is to, quote, provide expertise in the transition to digital payments to achieve the goals of empowering people and growing emerging economies. What people do they want to empower? The people whose cash they're taking away? Such nonsense. The alliance involves the following partners, quote unquote: the U.S. Agency for International Development, number of UN agencies, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, credit card companies, that's a surprise, MasterCard and Visa, and the failed and bailed out Citibank. Macroeconomists have also been, and when I say macroeconomists, I mean every sort of mainstream economist. They've been campaigning for severe restriction of the use of cash. Why? Well, because they realize that the zero interest rate policy hasn't worked, right? And they realize that quantitative easing policies haven't worked. So what's left? To pay people negative interest rates so that you're forced to spend, so that every day that you leave $1 in your account is a day that you lose part of that dollar. So how do you get to this negative nominal interest rate territory? Because people can just pull their cash out and earn zero return rather than a negative return. Well, the way to do that, get rid of cash.
In other words, a cash ban is required to execute negative interest rates.
This is what the central banks are doing, and they're resorting to all kinds of extreme policies, one of which, Craig, is pushing the world cashless. Not because it's better for us, not because it's more convenient, it's better for their system and their system of control.
This isn't just a local thing in Australia, right? This is a global trend.
And you actually have this happening all over the world through this alliance. It's called the Better Than Cash Alliance. I encourage you to go check out their website. It's very revealing. This is being funded by all the big, globalist foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates, the Ford Foundation, all these globalist foundations.
This system we've got now is the state, the government, using all its powers for a corporate elite at the expense of the people.
The secretariat of this Better Than Cash Alliance is none other than the United Nations Capital Development Fund. So the UN is leading this charge for a global cashless society.
And yet, Australia is just meekly following down the same path, partly, I think, thanks to the direction from the IMF and from BIS and elsewhere.
They have partners among governments. The U.S. government is giving them all kinds of tax money through U.S. aid, and they've partnered with a whole bunch of third world governments to start implementing this idea.
Privacy has to go so that financial control can reign.
Destroying cash, one, removes all the privacy from human beings, which quenches their speech. It makes it harder for people to speak truth when they're constantly monitored. The only true speech can exist when a person can speak without repercussion. And if everything that you say is monitored because you paid for it with your trackable credit card, like in the UK, if you say the wrong thing, the police knock on your door.
The actual aim of the flood of laws restricting or even prohibiting the use of cash is to force the public to make payments through the financial system. This enabled governments to expand their ability to spy on and keep track of their citizens' most private financial dealings in order to mulct their citizens of every last dollar of tax payments that they claim are due.
The crackdown will employ new data tools to expose Reuters, launch random checks on 10,000 businesses a year and encourage hotline tip-offs.
This is the start of a war on privacy. It's a war on currency. And you can understand why governments want to do it. If they abolish $10,000 cash transactions, they'll move to 9 and 5 and so on until everything is digital, and then they'll know everything that you're spending your money on. They can have bail-ins to support their banks, or they can have negative interest rates. They can force people to do things that otherwise they shouldn't.
Is being used in policy to encourage people to do what they ought. What they ought is a very politicised idea about who decides what is ought. You see this kind of thinking very much embedded in policy. We also have it here in Australia. There is also a nudge unit in PMNC, Prime Minister and Cabinet in Canberra.
And I'll tell you where my concern lies mostly. It's about not only government coercion, but the privacy. Big data is a dangerous tool and a dangerous weapon. And if I want to spend, $50 buying a bowl of scotch every single day, I don't want the government to know about it.
You have this kind of policy making where you have punitive style interventions on people's behaviour.
And if I have to put on a credit card, they will be able to know about it. I don't want my bank to necessarily know about it because they'll tell my health fund and so on. It'll go down the line and I'll be deemed a high risk. You know what? I want the government out of my life. I want it out of people's lives.
So cash is important. It's important for privacy. It's important for free speech. It's important so that you don't have to have your eyeballs on what my diet behaviors are if I'm insured, right? I don't need my health insurance premiums modified on your draconian monitoring of how I use my credit card. They all lose the data anyway. Everything you capture will be lost. So I hate the fact that you guys hate cash. It really bothers me. You guys and Australia.
But, this is a really critical issue, as you say, Robbie, because essentially what we have is we have a deep, dark black hole at the centre of our economy, which is actually where the government and the banks are dancing together. And it's basically sucking everything else in, but creating mayhem and destroying, wealth, households, and our futures simply because of the myopic view that's been pursued for at least 2 generations. So this is a huge issue, and I think the cash ban is actually the real lynch point here, right? It's the point at which we say thus far and no further. Because essentially, if we allow the cash ban just to roll through, it means that once again our civil liberties are removed. Once again, money is forced back into the banking system to the benefit of the banks and the bankers, but not to consumers. And essentially, it just provides more control at the centre and more support for the banking system. So this, I think, really becomes a very important touch point. And just to remind you again, whilst the consultation with regard to the draft bill is now closed, it is not too late to make your views known to your members of Parliament and senators. And contact details for each of those can be found on the parliamentary websites. It really is important to get up to speed with this issue, which is very, very significant and important, and to me represents a fundamental erosion of civil liberties and a fundamentally flawed strategy with regard to dealing with our economy.